We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Mem Zayin Amar Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 147a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked who is the author of this brisa. In this brisa, it says that if a person is very ill and they ask him who does he want to leave his property to, and he says that Dome sheyesh li ben, he says that I thought that I had a son, but achshav she'ein li ben, but he says now that I realize that I do not have a son, nechasai leploni, so then I want to give my property to so and so. Hayacholo mutal b'mita, so he's sick again, and he's in his deathbed. V'amru lo, and they say to him nechasav lami, they say, who are you giving your property to? Amar lehen, he says to them, Doma, I thought she'ishti mu'uberes, I thought again that my wife was pregnant, and achshav she'ein ishti mu'uberes, but now that I find out that my wife is not pregnant, nechasai leploni. So he says, I want to give my property to so and so. And the brisa continues, v'noda. So now in both of these cases, it then becomes known sheyesh lo ben, that actually he does have a son. In other words, he thought he had a son. He said that now I realize I don't have a son, so I'm giving it to so and so. But then it turns out he actually did have a son. Oh, shaisa ishto mu'uberes, or it turns out that his wife actually is pregnant. Again, he thought that his wife was pregnant, then he thought his wife is not pregnant, so he gave it to somebody else, but then it turns out his wife is pregnant. So the brisa says, ein matanaso matana. The brisa says that in these cases, the gift that he's giving to Ploni is not considered to be an effective gift, because he made it clear through what he was saying that really he would prefer to give it to his son, but he just thought that he did not have a son, and so the Gemara now wants to know who is the author of this brisa. And the Gemara says, Lema Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, v'lo Rabbanan, let us say that this brisa is authored by Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, who holds that we follow umdana, that we take into account the context of a person's words in order to determine what he means. So when he said he was giving it to so-and-so, it was clear that that was only because there was a certain understanding. And let us say that this brisa does not follow the Rabbanan. And the Gemara responds, Afilu Temer Rabbanan, you can even say that this brisa is the Rabbanan, who generally speaking do not follow umdana, but in this case already do meshani. In this case, when he actually says, I thought that I had a son, and now that I don't have a son, I want to give it to Ploni, that's already 100% clear what he means. And even the Rabbanan, who generally do not follow umdana, here they would say that we can interpret his words in this fashion. And the Gemara says, Udukarila my karila. So the fact that you asked the question, why did you even ask it? It seems so obvious that this case is different and the Rabbanan would agree. The Gemara says, not necessarily. Mao detema, what might you have said? It's sarei hu dekamidkar. Maybe he's just mentioning his pain. He's saying, Achshav she'ein li ben, I thought I had a son, and now it turns out that I don't have a son, but he doesn't mean to attach that as a stipulation, so to speak, to what he is giving. Kamash malan. And so that's what it's teaching us over here. It's teaching us that that's not the case. We interpret his words, even according to the Rabbanan, in this fashion. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Zeira, my Rav. Rabbi Zeira says that Rav says, Minayin lematanas shchiv meira. From where do we know that if a shchiv meira, someone on his deathbed, he gives a gift, how do we know shehim min haTorah, that is from the Torah, that is a doraisa? And the Rashbam explains, Minayin lematanas shchimera shekona bedibor below kinyan. What we're asking over here is, how do we know that by a shchimera the kinyan is made with dibor just by speech alone below kinyan sudar? And you don't need to have a physical action. You don't need to have, for example, a kinyan sudar. You don't need to give a scarf or do some kind of a kinyan. Kagon mitzava machmas misa. For example, let's say a person is giving instructions because he's going to die. The paskinan lekamon, we paskin later on, the lo ba'i kinyan. It says you don't require a kinyan. You don't need to have that physical kinyan. Afilu b'mixas, even a partial kinyan you don't need. V'hu demis, and that's as long as he actually dies, then the kinyan is effective. Inami shchiv meira, or if you have someone on his deathbed, shechala kol nechasa below shir, that he distributes all of his property, doesn't leave anything for himself, umis, and then he dies. So again, in these cases, dibor alone creates the kinyan. You don't need to have an action. You don't need to have a physical action to create the kinyan. How do we know that that is true from the Torah? And again, so the Gemara says, how do we know shehimin haTorah shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, v'havartem es nachalaso lebito. It says that you're going to transfer the inheritance to his daughter, and so we understand from that yesh lo havara acheres shehikazu. There's another kind of havara where you're transferring the property that is similar to that. Ve'ezuzu, in which case would be similar to this kind of a transfer, again where you don't need that action to make the kinyan. Ma'na shchimera, the gift of a kinyan of a shchimera would be similar to this kind of havara, so to speak, and therefore we know from the Torah the idea of a ma'na shchimera. Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Bar Avua Mehacha. Rav Nachman says that Rabba Bar Avua says from here, from the following pasuk, when esatem es nachaloso le'echav la'achiv, it says that you're going to give his nachal le'echav, you're going to give the inheritance to his brothers. Yeshlach nesina acheres shikazu. So we learn from this pasuk, there's another kind of giving, another kind of gifting that is similar. Ve'ezuzu matnas shchemira. And what is this? This refers to the matnas shchemira. And the Rashbam explains, shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, va'avartem es nachaloso, to have a motzi lemichtav, the pasuk could have said, ish kiyamus uvein ein lo nachaloso lebito. It didn't need to say va'avartem es nachaloso. Va'avartem yiseru, the word va'avartem is extra, that's why we're darshaning it. And then the Gemara said, unesatem es nachaloso, we learn now from the pasuk, which says unesatem, that you're going to give it to his brothers. Also says the Rashbam, kra yiseru, that's an extra pasuk. The matzi lemichtav im ein lo bas nachaloso le'echa v'chein kul. And it could have just said no daughter, then it goes to the brothers. The word unesatem is extra, and so therefore again we learn from this. We learn that this idea of a matnas shchemira, and we'll do this Rashbam, the previous Rashbam as well, shehi kazu, we learn out that it is similar to this. What does that mean? Birshus habas, some have the gears of ki yerushas habas. It's just like the inheritance of the daughter, meaning a matnas shchemira is like yerushas habas. Shehi below kinyan. The point is you don't need to have a physical action as a kinyan. It works with dibur, with speech alone. And the Gemara continues, Rav Nachman, my time alomar mi v'havartem. Rav Nachman, why doesn't he learn from the pasuk where it says v'havartem? Ahumi boy leilechid Rebbe, because that word in the pasuk is used for the teaching of Rebbe. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, Rebbe Yomer, Rebbe says, Bekula nemra behen nesina. By all the cases of the inheritance, it uses the word nesina to give. V'kan nemra havara. But over here by the daughter, it uses this word havara. And so what do we learn from that? Ein loch shemavir nachal mishevet l'shevet. What we learn is, you don't have a situation where the inheritance is passed or transferred from one tribe to another tribe, elabas. That's only going to happen through a daughter. Why does that happen through a daughter? Hoel uveno ubala yarshanosa, because her son and her husband, they inherit her. So therefore, if the son, the husband, is from a different shevet, that's a situation where the nachla is going to pass from one shevet to the other shevet. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Zera, my time alomer unesatem. Rabbi Zera, why doesn't he learn it out from the pasuk of unesatem? And the Gemara says to that, Orchei dekrahu, that's just the normal way that the pasuk speaks. He doesn't consider it an extra word in the pasuk that can be darshaned. And the Gemara continues, Rav Menashe bar Yirmiyah Amar, Rav Menashe bar Yirmiyah says, Mehacha, the source of the idea of a matnas shchemira is from here, from the following pasuk. This is in Sefer Melachim. The pasuk says, by Yomim Hoheim, in those days, Cholach Chizkiyo Lamus, it says that Chizkiyo was ill and he was going to die. Vayavo Elav Yeshayo ben Amot Hanavi, and so Yeshayo came to him. Vayomer Elav, he said to him, Ko Amar Hashem, so says Hashem, Tzav leVeisecha, Ki Meis Atav V'lo Techai. You have to instruct your household what to do with your property because you are going to die. And we learn from that pasuk, B'tzava B'alma, the instruction alone, that creates the kinyan. You don't need a physical action of a kinyan. Rami bar Yecheskel Amar Mehach, Rami bar Yecheskel says from here, from the following pasuk, in Sefer Shmuel it says, V'achitofel ra ki lo nesa atzaso, it says that Achitofel saw that they weren't following his advice. V'yachavo shesachamor v'yelach el beso, so it says that he saddled his donkey, went to his house, el iro, to his city, v'yitzav el beso, and then it says he gave instructions in terms of his household, his will, v'yechonik, and then it says he strangled himself, he committed suicide. And so we see again from this idea, v'yitzav el beso, b'tzava b'alma, the instruction alone, you see the idea of a matnas shchemira. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Shlosha Devarim Tziva Achitofel is Bonav. Achitofel said 3 pieces of advice to his sons. Al tiu b'machlokes, number 1, don't argue, don't be within machlokes. Ve'al timur du b'malchus beis David, don't rebel against the kingdom of the house of David. And also, v'yomtav shel atzeres, the 3rd piece of advice on the yomtav of atzeres of Shavuos, borer, if it's a clear day, so then zero chitim, then you should plant wheat. That's an indication that that will be successful. Marzutra Amar, Marzutra says it wasn't that it was on the yomtav of atzeres borer, that if it's a clear day on Shavuos. Rather, Marzutra Amar, Marzutra says, bolul itmar. It's bolul, meaning to say, if it's a cloudy day, then that's an indication that it's a time to plant wheat. Amri Nahardai, Mishmei Rabbi Yaakov, they said in Nahardai, in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, lo borer borer mamish velo bolul bolul mamish. In these 2 versions, when we say borer, a clear day, we don't mean a totally clear day. And when we say bolul, when we say a cloudy day, we don't mean a totally cloudy day. You can reconcile these 2 versions. Ela afilu bolul, for example, even if it's cloudy, v'ruach tzefonis min ashvaso, but the northern wind is blowing, zehu borer, that's considered to be a clear day, and that's a good indication for the wheat crop. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Abba le Rav Ashi. Rabbi Abba said to Rav Ashi, Anon ad Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi masninon lo. We learn and we follow the teaching of Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi as follows. The Yomar Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, because Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, Matzah Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, at the end of Sukkot, on the last day of the Yom Tov of Sukkot, after that, Hakol Sofin La'ashan Hamarocha. Everybody looks to the smoke of the Mizbeach to determine whether it will be a good crop or not. That's how we determine. It's not by Shavuos to see whether it's a cloudy day or a clear day. Rather, it's Matzah Yom Tov of the last day of the Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag. That's when we look to see which way the smoke is blowing, which way the wind is blowing, so to speak. Not a klap et safan, if it's leaning towards the north, if the smoke is going towards the north, then aniyim samechim, then the poor people are happy. Ubale batim atzavin, and the people who are the homeowners, the wealthy people, they're sad. Because the rain that year, it's an indication, merubin, that there's going to be a lot of rain. Upeiros markivin, but it's going to be a situation where the produce is not going to last. It's going to spoil quickly. They're not going to be able to store it for a long time, and therefore the prices are going to drop. That's why the poor people are going to be happy. Not a klape dorim. Let's say we see the smoke is leaning towards the south. So then aniyim atzavim, so then the poor are sad. Ubale batim samechim, and the owners, they're happy. Because it's not going to be a lot of rain. Upeiros mishtamin, and therefore they'll be able to keep the produce stored for a long time. They'll be able to raise the prices in that situation, and that's why again the poor are sad and the bali batim are happy. Not a klape mizrach, let's say it's leaning towards the east, hakol samechen, then that's perfect. Everybody's happy in that situation. It means the prices will be good, but there will be plentiful crop. And klape ma'irav, and if it's leaning towards the west, hakol atzavin, so then everyone's going to be sad, because it means it's not going to be a situation of a lot of crop, but it's also going to be a situation where it's going to be high prices. And the Rashbam explains, Anonad Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi masninan law. Again, we follow Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Simone tvus, meaning in order to determine how good the crop is going to be, im yatzlichu im lav, if it will be successful or not. Ad Rav Yitzchak samchinan, we rely on the simon of Rav Yitzchak. V'lo asimone atzeres b'shvil shebechag nidon alamayim. We're not relying on the simonim of the time of Shavuos. Rather, we're relying on the simonim at the times of Sukkot, because that's when we're judged in terms of the water, in terms of the rain. Klap et safan, again, if it's facing towards the north, so then ruach deromis ben hasheves. But what that really means is the southern wind is blowing. Umateo klap et safan. That's why it's leaning. It's blowing it towards the north. Upeirosei and markiv, and then you have a situation where the produce is going to spoil. Umitokshen yechol lishamer nimkarn bazol. So since it can't be stored properly, therefore it's sold for cheap. The prices are lower. Klap et dorim, if it's towards the south, meaning ruach tzafon ben hasheves bo, meaning you have the northern wind blowing. And that's a situation where there's not a lot of rain. However, uva osam hageshamim misbarchan aperos, but it's enough rain. Through that little amount of rain, there's a blessing on the produce hanizroin which are planted. V'shebot saros mishtaron, and the produce that's in the storehouses actually stores well. In that situation, v'nim karn biyoker, and so in such a situation, the prices will go up. It's sold at a high price. Harei revach lashirim v'yotzav laniyim. So there's profit for the wealthy, but the poor are sad in this situation. And lemizrach kulan samechem, if it's towards the east, so then everyone's happy. Shem aravis mamteres b'mido peiros enon biyoker, because over there the wind from the west, so it makes a perfect amount of rain, and the produce is not so expensive. And kulan atzavin, if it's the other direction, if it's l'mayriv, so then everybody is going to be sad. Shemizrachis, because the eastern wind, monas mater, prevents the rain. Umevia betzora, so there's a famine. V'yoker gadol, and everything's expensive. Upeiros karka einam tzomchim, and the produce is not going to grow properly. Alma mizrachis kasha uma'aravis yaf, and you see the idea that the eastern wind, that is a difficult one, that's bad, and the western wind, that brings success. But the Gemara continues, Uramini, we have the following contradiction, Mizrachis liolam yafe, Ma'aravis liolam kasha. It says that the eastern wind is always beneficial, and the western wind is always bad. That's the exact opposite of what we said above. And the Brisa here continues, Ruach Tzifonis, as far as the northern wind, Yafe lechitim, B'shah she'yiviu shlish, that's good for wheat at a time that they've grown a third. The kasha l'zeisim b'shah she'yanitzu, and it's bad for olives at the time that they're blossoming. V'ruach Jeromis, and the southern wind, kasha lechitim b'shah she'yiviu shlish, the opposite, that's bad for the wheat at a time that they've grown a third. V'yafel l'zeisim, and it's good for the olives, b'shah she'yanitzu, at the time that they are blossoming. V'yamar Rav Yosef, v'yitema Mar Zutra, v'yitema Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and Rav Yosef says, and some say Mar Zutra says, and some say Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, v'simonech, that the siman, the way to remember in terms of which wind is good for the wheat and which one is good for the olives, shulchan b'tzafan, that in the Beis Hamikdash, the shulchan, the table which had the bread, that indicates the wheat that was placed in the north. That shows that the northern wind is good for the wheat. Umenorah, and the menorah which was lit with the oil. So Bedarim, that was in the south, and that shows that the southern wind is beneficial for the olives. Hai Merabi Didei, V'hai Merabi Didei, this one increases for its own, and this one increases for its own, meaning the shulchan, which is relevant to the wheat, that's in the north, that's good, so to speak. The north is good for the wheat, and the menorah, which is the south, that's good for its own, that's good for the oil of the olives, and that's in the south. So the southern wind is good for the zaysim, is good for the olives. In any case, we have a contradiction over here in terms of the eastern wind and the western wind, whether it's beneficial or not. And the Gemara answers to that, Lokash, it's not difficult. Halon, v'halahu, this is for us in Bavel, and this is for them in Eretz Yisrael. And the Rashbam explains, Halon livnei Bavel hashochnim b'mitzula v'artzeinu melachlachas, for us in Bavel, so we live in the lowlands and there's a lot of moisture, v'eina tzricha l'matar kol kach, we don't need so much rain. So l'didan, so therefore for us, misnia brisa basraisa, that's the later brisa, that's talking about Bavel, shemarav is kasha, the western wind is going to be difficult for those in Bavel, if shemam teres yoser midai, livnei Bavel, because that's too much rain for the people of Bavel, they don't need so much. Umizrach es yaf, and the eastern wind is going to be good for those in Bavel. Ubraisa kamais, in the earlier brisa, the misnia ibcha, that has the reverse, luhu livnei Eretz Yisrael, that's for them in Eretz Yisrael. Sha'artzam gavoa, because their land is higher up. Usrichin l'matar harbe, and they need a lot of rain. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Abba Shol Omer, Abba Shol says, Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, on the Yom Tov of Shavuos, Borer, if it's a clear day, Simin Yafel L'chol Hashana Kula, that's a good sign for the entire year. Amar Rav Zvid says, Hayoma Kama Dereishas, on the first day of the year, on Rosh Hashanah, Ichamim Kula Shasa Chamim, if it's hot on that day, so the whole year is going to be hot. Ikarin, if it's cold on that day, Kula Shasa Kriya, the whole year is going to be cold. And the Gemara says, Lamai Nafka Mina, what difference does that make? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Mem Zayin Amid Beis.